Welcome to the Surrender Spectrum, in tune with Travis Anthony Johnson. In this episode, I'm going to be completely vulnerable. I'm going to speak about my mental health issues that are a result from substance abuse. For most of my 20s, I was an extreme cocaine and alcohol abuser. With cocaine came a lot of selfish behavior. I was extremely egocentric. I had to be the center of attention. It was all about me. That voice inside my head was my biggest fan when it came time to get what I wanted. It loved letting me know that we were a team, that we could take the world on. All was fine in my mind as long as I was high. My ego would push me to do whatever it took to get high and avoid the come down, because when that come down came, it felt extremely threatened. The comfort zone was becoming out of reach the longer I went without cocaine. In these times, my ego went from being my friend to then turning on me because it felt uncomfortable, and it would start to talk down to me in the worst ways, almost letting me know that I fucked up my whole life. It wanted to get a rise out of me so that I would sink to an even lower level of selfishness to get drugs by any means necessary. Be that by selling my possessions to using my rent money to stealing from the ones I loved most. And often it would work because I couldn't handle the mental battery that would be the result of the come down. But for the grace of God, I survived the darkness of my blow and alcohol days. I went on and got sober and did my first true run through the 12 steps, which provided me the spiritual awakening that was necessary for me to start a new life, living clean and serene. But one thing that never left, even in my days of sobriety, was the ego was always bitching and complaining to try to get me to use again. This goes to show that my problem wasn't that I couldn't stop using once I started. It was that I couldn't stop starting due to the voice in my head that does everything in its power to get me to use again. And its new favorite time to be beaking off is during my meditation. Most people that are new to meditation say they can't do it because their head is too loud and they can't focus on silence. This is due to the ego being uncomfortable. It seeks chaos. In my experience early on with meditation, I would struggle to find that silence. It wasn't until I read Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, that I finally understood what my real problem was. In the opening pages of the book, he was feeling suicidal, and he said, "I cannot live with myself." And in that moment, he realized there was a personality split between the I and the self, like there was two entities. I remember feeling like my mind got rocketed into the fourth dimension when I read that, because it explained why I have been fighting myself for so long. Because the idea of who I am is taking over my innermost self. This gave me the idea to go into meditation by almost inviting my ego to speak first to get whatever off its chest, any excitement or any fear. Just to hear it out so that it has no reason to be interrupting the meditation, because it will have nothing of value to say. The ego just wants to be heard and validated. So if I pre-validate my ego before going into meditation, I found profound moments of peace and calmness. Now this is way back in 2020, I believe. Yeah, 2020. Back when I only had one extra voice in my head that I thought was at times unbearable. Little did I know that soon to follow, my ego would fragment and multiply deep within the shadows of my mind. Following my spiritual awakening, I fell off again because I became complacent and stopped working my 12-step program. My methamphetamine years were about to see me traversing through the deepest depths of my own mental hell. Psychosis became my new norm as my ego fractured into individual entities of my mind. All of different voices stemmed from my ego, which always just used to be the sound of my own voice. But these entities were built from different sounding voices that I had heard in my past, manifested from my own memory. It felt like I had sentient beings speaking at their own will in my head. It was absolute torture, and they felt the need to make it as such. They made me feel like I was the worst human in the world. They made it very evident that I brought them into a world where they were extremely limited to the sense of speech and thought alone, like they were lesser beings. All they could do was listen to me torture myself, and quite frankly, they were sick and tired of hearing me suffering, and were even more annoyed at the fact that I didn't acknowledge their suffering. They regularly tried to make me kill myself to try and end their suffering. This was, by a landslide, the worst thing that I had ever gone through in my life. And what was worse was the fact that the only way I knew how to deal with it was abusing the one drug that was causing it to begin with. As time went on, I began to notice a familiarity from these voices. The way that they put me down when I was at my worst felt like my own ego putting me down to get what it wanted. I began putting the pieces together and realized that they stemmed as a broken manifestation of my own ego. So, when the time came that I finally cleaned up my act and got clean from drugs and alcohol, just as the ego didn't leave when I got clean, neither did these voices. So I decided to start testing some old practices in a new way. Maybe I could find some peace if I acknowledged them, if I pre-validated their innermost desires to be heard. As crazy as that may sound, the more I practiced this, the nicer and more quiet the voices got. It reminds me of something Jesus said when he was getting tortured. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And this was the mindset I decided to have towards these entities. They were causing me to suffer, but they didn't truly mean to. It was just because they themselves were suffering. And the more that I lived this way, the more the voices started to go away, and I started to heal. And I can gratefully say today that they're almost gone. I had to accept that I may not get back what I had lost, which was my sanity, because it was a result of my own choices. I caused my own brain damage, so I can't blame anything or anyone else for my suffering. Now, coming out of that chaos and pain, I had to start over from the ground up. It wasn't enough to simply stop using drugs and alcohol. I had to rebuild my mind, body, and spirit brick by brick. My recovery journey has been one of unlearning destructive patterns, confronting the loudest parts of my ego, and finding new ways to meet myself with compassion instead of shame. Every day since has been a process of relearning how to live, not just exist. The voices and fragmentation I experienced taught me that healing doesn't always come as a sudden miracle, but as a slow reassembly of the soul, a willingness to face the shadowed parts of myself, and a constant reaching towards something greater than me. This is where the spiritual path of the 12 steps truly began to transform me. While the early steps taught me humility and honesty, step 11 brought a new dimension: conscious contact with God as I understood Him. Through meditation and prayer, I found a way to quiet the chaos, to hear something deeper than the voices in my head, and to start aligning my life with the higher purpose. Step 11 isn't just a part of my recovery, it's become a guiding force for how I face every challenge, every whisper of temptation, and every shadow that tries to pull me back. It's here that I discovered the power of stillness and the voice of God that was waiting beneath the noise. So this brings us to step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. The phrase conscious contact might be two of the most misunderstood words in all of recovery literature. When most people first encounter step 11, they imagine it requires becoming some kind of spiritual mystic, sitting in lotus position for hours, waiting for divine revelations that arrive with thunderclaps and burning bushes. This misconception has caused countless people to either skip step 11 entirely or approach it with such unrealistic expectations that they inevitably feel like failures. The truth about conscious contact is both simpler and more profound than most people realize. It's not about achieving a perpetual state of of cosmic communion or hearing God's voice as clearly as your GPS navigation system. Conscious contact is fundamentally about awareness, developing the ability to recognize that you are not alone, that there is a source of wisdom and strength available to you that transcends your individual ego and limited perspective. Before we explore what conscious contact actually means, let's clear away some common misconceptions that create unnecessary barriers to spiritual growth. Conscious contact is not a constant mystical experience. You don't need to feel spiritually high or emotionally overwhelmed to be in conscious contact with your higher power. In fact, the most profound spiritual connection often feels quiet, natural, and surprisingly ordinary. Conscious contact is not about hearing audible voices or receiving detailed instructions. While some people do report dramatic spiritual experiences, the vast majority of divine guidance comes through subtle impressions, gradual insights, and what the Big Book calls intuitive thought. Conscious contact is not dependent on religious training or theological knowledge. You don't need to be able to quote scripture or understand complex spiritual concepts. The only requirement is willingness to acknowledge that there might be a source of wisdom greater than your own ego. Conscious contact is not a performance that requires perfect spiritual behavior. You don't have to meditate for hours, pray in a specific way, or eliminate all human flaws to experience divine connection. God doesn't require spiritual perfection, only spiritual willingness. So, what is conscious contact really? At its core, it's the growing awareness that you are part of something larger than yourself, connected to a source of love and wisdom that is always available but never intrusive. It's learning to distinguish between the voice of your ego, which is typically driven by fear, pride, and self interest, and the voice of your higher power, which consistently guides you towards love, service, and truth. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous describes this as developing a vital sixth sense. Just as your physical senses help you navigate the material world, this spiritual sense helps you navigate life's deeper questions and challenges. It's the inner knowing that helps you recognize when you're moving in the right direction, even when that direction doesn't make logical sense to your rational mind. Consider how this works in practical terms. You've probably experienced moments when you just knew that the right thing to do, even when it wasn't the easy thing or logical thing. Perhaps you felt compelled to call a friend at exactly the moment they needed support, or you found yourself saying exactly the right words to someone who was struggling, words that seemed to come from somewhere beyond your conscious planning. These experiences point to the reality of conscious contact. It's not that God is controlling your actions like a puppet master, but rather that when you become willing to set aside your ego's agenda, you naturally align with the wisdom that is greater than your individual understanding. Now, this reminds me of my own kind of experience of when, or more so of why I'm so grateful to God for everything that happens in my life. I believe in this saying that God is everything or else he is nothing, because it is the source of all things. And so, when something profound pops into my head that was of no prior knowledge to myself, I don't just take the credit for it and 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 act like I came up with that idea in the first place. If something profound pops into my head that I've never thought about before, and I am able to share that with somebody else, or to just begin to grow that knowledge within myself, I simply just go to God and say, thank you for providing this knowledge to me, right? Because it has been wisdom that has been shared with me. It allows me to stay humble and practice humility by not taking credit for things that I didn't already know before, because that's just what my ego would want. It wants to take the credit for everything. It wants to act like it is the master of all things. um, and so it's just a good practice to always be, grateful to God for all these things that happen in our life. It's what makes prayer so much easier for myself. I remember when I first started praying, I was just simply told to pray in the morning and pray at night before going to bed. And I used to struggle because I didn't know the words to say. But as time went on, the words just came to me because I was simply just sharing what happened in my day, especially at night. During the day, or on awakening, in my prayers I would kind of just ask for guidance and the strength to get through anything that life hurdles at me, and to ask, God for help to help others that are struggling as well, and to bless my family and bless my friends, and to bless the path that I walk today. But at night before I go to sleep, my prayer would simply be to say thanks for everything that happened in that day, just to be extremely grateful for everything that happened, good or bad, because even if it was bad, it was a learning experience for me. It was the ability And the fact that I get to go to sleep alive, knowing that I overcame whatever life threw at me. Like, for example, if somebody passed away and I'd become extremely sad and it would feel like my world was caving in on me, I get to at least be grateful that that person's death didn't cause me to react in a very negative way that would be a danger to my own life. I know I know grieving is a serious emotion to deal with, and a lot of us deal with it in many different ways, but um it's more of that gratitude to God for showing me that that person that passed away wouldn't want me grieving for them. They would want me to remember all the good times, and to be remembered for who they were, not in their suffering or in the moments that led to their death. And that's God's wisdom coming to me, and at least I get to go to sleep knowing that I'll awaken the next day, God God willingly, um, and be able to move past my grievances. And this could work for anything. It doesn't have to be someone dying. It could be, maybe I had a really, really hard day at work, and it put me in a terrible funk throughout the rest of my day, that I was in a negative mood. I was treating others unfairly. Um, and and it brings me to a moment where I get to see and reflect on myself and see that I was acting this way, and either go about fixing it if I treated other people badly, or simply just know that you know I'm at a point where I'm not suffering from that day at work anymore, and and God gave me the strength to get through it. And you know God's love is evident in the fact that we overcame and we triumphed something that was such a negative impact in that day. And um and that's God's presence, is overcoming our struggles, right? um but kind of getting back into step 11, the step, that step specifically says that we need to improve our conscious contact, which reveals something crucial about the nature of spiritual connection. It's progressive. You don't achieve conscious contact once and then maintain it effortlessly forever, like physical fitness, or you know it's spiritual consciousness requires ongoing practice and attention. This happened to me, right? Like, after my cocaine alcohol days, I had my first spiritual awakening, and my life had been completely changed. And even though I did not forget these lessons that I learned from the 12 steps and my new way of life, um but I still slipped up, and I fell back into the darkness of addiction again. And it's not because God isn't powerful enough to keep me safe. It's the fact that I didn't keep practicing, these spiritual principles, and kept doing the work, right? The complacency was on me. And so, you know, the reawakening is, I think, an even harder thing to find for me, because I had to hit a rock bottom to to become willing, to find the gift of desperation to go towards finding this new spiritual way of life. I think maybe I've mentioned it in other episodes, but it reminds me of when you're at a meeting when you're brand new and somebody's like, hi, my name's so and so, and I'm a grateful alcoholic or addict. And I feel like I said this in the last episode, to be honest, but I can't remember. But they're like, hi, my name is so and so, and I'm a grateful alcoholic or addict. And somebody who's new, just like, grateful. Like, why would you be grateful for being an alcoholic or an addict? And you come to learn that your your greatest downfall was actually the beginning of your greatest triumph, right? Like, it brought you towards finding this new way of life that frees you from the grip that the ego has on you. And so we become grateful of being an addict in the first place, because it was the thing that guided us towards this spiritual awakening. And so, when you learn the knowledge of all these principles and this new way of life, and then you slip up, right? It's a whole nother ball game, because now your ego has all that knowledge, and it'll begin to use that against you, or to tell you that it didn't work, right? Because it always wants what it wants, right? It wants you to be weak and down, so that you could fall into a place where you seek comfort from your suffering, right? And that's always going to be, some form of manifestation through a spiritual malady, right? Like through depression or anxiety, trying to get you to seek comfort, which was from drugs and alcohol, right? And so we have to almost have a new experience to have this new reawakening, and that's a tricky thing to do. But that's really when you have to go to God and to practice steps, like especially like step 11, because you need to find that conscious contact, and to become willing to trust the guidance of God. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it wasn't easy to get drugs by any means. It seemed like it was easy because we had our ego on our side, rooting us on to steal from others, or to sell our own things, and to do whatever it took to get drugs. Because I mean, for years and years and years, I didn't have the money to get all the drugs that I got, yet I still got them. And it seems like it's an impossible thing to have done, but I did it anyways. So if I have that same kind of motivation, to seek God, and to do what I have to do to find that new ease and comfort from the ego, right? We have to go above and beyond. But the thing is that we don't have our ego backing us up this time. Now we have it working against us while we're trying to find help from God. So we have to trust something that is realistically silent, right? It comes in the quietness, and we have this ego beacon off. And for me, I had an ego beacon off, and I had about 6 to 7 other voices that are beacon off at me at the same time in my head, which was absolute torture. But as I said, right, it's just stemmed from suffering, and I had to understand that that's what it was. So you know they didn't understand. If I speak to them as if they were or speak about them as if they were a sentient being, right? They didn't understand, right? They didn't know any better. They just knew suffering. So misery loves company. That's all it was. They were trying to do was to make me be on their level. And so, what other choice did I have other than to seek spiritual help, and to get better, and to recover. And as I said, it's not easy, but neither was getting drugs when we absolutely needed them. So we have to have that same willingness to go to any lengths to get it. You know, the spiritual connection, the nature of it is, it's it is progressive, as I was saying. Um, this progressive aspect is actually encouraging rather than discouraging. It means you don't have to achieve some impossible standard of spiritual perfection before you can begin experiencing divine guidance. Even people who are new to recovery and spiritual practice can begin developing conscious contact immediately, simply by becoming willing to acknowledge their need for help from something greater than themselves. And the Big Book acknowledges this reality directly. It says, being still, inexperienced, and just making conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. This passage contains tremendous wisdom. It's saying that spiritual guidance is not about perfection, but about direction. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to think you're following divine guidance when you're actually following your ego. It's very cunning like that. You're going to misinterpret signs and act on impulses that turn out to be purely human rather than divinely inspired. And that's perfectly normal. That's part of the learning process. The goal is not to eliminate all spiritual errors, but to gradually become more skilled at recognizing the difference between divine guidance and ego manipulation. One of the most important skills in developing conscious contact is learning to recognize it when it's already happening. Many people miss their spiritual experiences because they're looking for something more dramatic or obvious than what's actually occurring. Conscious contact often manifests as a sense of inner peace in the midst of external chaos. When you find yourself remaining calm during situations that would normally trigger anxiety or anger, you're likely experiencing divine support that transcends your natural emotional responses. Kind of like, what I was talking about with dealing with grievance. Clarity about what action to take when facing difficult decisions. This isn't necessarily about receiving detailed instructions, but rather about feeling a clear sense of the next right step, even when you can't see the bigger picture. And that's kind of like what I was saying about dealing with the hard day at work, right? You're in it, you're in the midst of it, but and you're facing all these difficult decisions on how to deal with the day. And the fact that we get to a point where we have overcome it, that is the evidence of God, right? It also manifests as compassion for people who would normally irritate or threaten you. When you find yourself responding with understanding rather than defensiveness to difficult people, you're accessing a love that comes from beyond your ego's natural tendency towards self-protection. The ability to help others in ways that surprise you. Sometimes you'll find yourself saying exactly what someone needed to hear, or offering exactly the kind of support that makes a difference, without having consciously planned your words or actions, right? And that's when we just become grateful to God for implanting that, that compassion and those things to say, even though sometimes we didn't even have that knowledge in the first place, and it just popped into our head and we had the right things to say. And we just practice humility by saying thank you for it, and not giving our ego the credit because that's what it wants always. Another um, another uh, manifestation of the conscious contact is a shift from asking what can I get to how can I serve. When your default question changes from self-centered to other-centered, you're operating from a consciousness that transcends individual ego. Synchronicities that feel meaningful rather than coincidental. While not every coincidence is a divine message, there are moments when the timing of events feels too perfect to be random, and these experiences often point towards spiritual connection. For people in recovery, conscious contact isn't just a nice spiritual addition to their program. It's often the difference between long-term sobriety and eventual relapse. Addiction is fundamentally a disease of disconnection. Active addiction involves disconnection from our authentic selves, from healthy relationships, from reality itself, and from any sense of meaning or purpose larger than immediate gratification. Recovery, therefore, must involve reconnection. We reconnect with our authentic values, with honest relationships, with reality as it actually is rather than as we wish it were. But the deepest reconnection, the one that makes all the others possible, is reconnection with a source of love and strength that transcends our individual willpower. This is why the third step involves turning our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. It's not because human will is inherently bad, but because human will operating in isolation is simply insufficient to overcome the power of addiction. We need to access, or we need access to, a strength that is greater than our individual capacity for self-control. Conscious contact is how we maintain that access. It's how we stay connected to the source of power that makes recovery possible. Without ongoing conscious contact, we gradually drift back towards the illusion that we can manage our lives through individual effort and control. And for people with addictive diseases, that illusion is deadly. While conscious contact ultimately transcends technique, it does require certain practical foundations. The step specifically mentions prayer and meditation as the primary tools for developing spiritual connection. And these practices create the conditions that make conscious contact more likely to occur. Prayer is fundamentally about communication with your higher power. This can involve formal religious prayers, but it could also be as simple as talking honestly about your day, your struggles, your gratitude, and your need for guidance. As I was saying before, the key is approaching prayer as conversation rather than performance. A meditation is about creating space for listening. While prayer involves speaking to God, meditation involves creating quiet space where you might become aware of divine presence or guidance. This doesn't require hours of perfect stillness. Even 5 minutes of quiet attention can create significant spiritual opening. Daily spiritual practice provides consistency that allows conscious contact to deepen over time. Just as physical exercise builds strength gradually through regular practice, spiritual exercise builds conscious contact through daily attention to your relationship with your higher power. Willingness might be the most important foundation of all. Conscious contact requires willingness to acknowledge that there might be a source of wisdom greater than your individual understanding. Willingness to ask for help and willingness to act on the guidance you receive, even when it challenges your ego's preferences. One of the biggest obstacles to developing genuine conscious contact is the tendency to turn spiritual practice into spiritual performance. This happens when we become more focused on looking spiritual than on actually connecting with our higher power. Spiritual performance might involve meditating for long periods, not because it deepens your connection, but because it makes you feel spiritually accomplished. It might involve using complex spiritual language, not because it expresses your genuine experience, but because it makes you sound enlightened. This realization brings profound relief. Instead of carrying the exhausting burden of trying to manage every aspect of your life through individual effort, you can focus on your actual job, being available to serve something greater than yourself, instead of spending your energy trying to figure out how to get what you want. You can spend your energy learning to recognize and follow divine guidance. This doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible. Conscious contact actually makes you more effective, not less, because you're operating from alignment rather than resistance. When you're trying to force your will on circumstances, you create friction and exhaust yourself fighting reality. When you're aligned with divine will, you find yourself moving with the current rather than against it. The step asks us to pray only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. This is perhaps the most practical spiritual guidance ever written. Instead of praying for specific outcomes, which puts us in a position of trying to teach God how to run the universe, we pray for guidance and strength. We ask to know what's ours to do, and we ask for the ability to do it. This kind of prayer transforms your relationship with both God and life itself. Instead of approaching your higher power as a cosmic vending machine that should deliver your preferred outcomes, you approach divine wisdom as a trusted advisor who can see the bigger picture that's invisible to your limited perspective. Ultimately, conscious contact isn't something you achieve, it's something you practice. It's not a spiritual state you reach and then maintain effortlessly, but rather an ongoing relationship that deepens through attention and grows stronger through use. Like any relationship, your connection with your higher power will have moments of closeness and moments that feel more distant. There will be times when guidance feels clear and obvious, and times when you feel like you're operating on spiritual autopilot. There will be periods of profound spiritual growth and periods that feel more like spiritual maintenance. All of this is normal and healthy. The goal isn't to maintain perfect spiritual connection at all times. That's neither possible nor necessary. The goal is to maintain your willingness to stay connected, to keep practicing the behaviors that support conscious contact, and to remain open to divine guidance even when you can't feel it clearly. This willingness to practice conscious contact, regardless of immediate spiritual feelings, is actually a profound form of faith. It's choosing to operate from spiritual principles even when you don't feel particularly spiritual. It's continuing to pray and meditate even when these practices feel dry or mechanical. It's asking for guidance even when you're not sure anyone is listening. And here's what many people discover: the willingness to practice conscious contact, even when it doesn't feel particularly rewarding, is often what creates the conditions for spiritual breakthrough. At least for deeper spiritual breakthrough. It's in the moments when we choose faith over feelings that we often experience the most profound spiritual growth. Conscious contact then is both the foundation and the goal of step 11. It's the awareness that makes recovery possible and the relationship that makes life meaningful. It's not about becoming someone different than who you are. It's about becoming who you actually are beneath all layers of fear, ego, and addiction. When you develop genuine conscious contact with your higher power, you discover that you are loved, guided, and supported in ways you never imagined possible. You find that you have access to wisdom that transcends your individual understanding and strength that exceeds your personal capacity. More importantly, you discovered that you are never alone. This is the promise of step 11. Not that life will become easy, but that you will never again have to face life's challenges using only your individual resources. Through conscious contact with God as you understand Him, you gain access to all the guidance, strength, and love you need to live a life of meaning, service, and genuine freedom. And that's the honest fact about it all. And you know what? That brings us to a 45-minute mark. So with that, let's close this out. What's that line that I always use? It's been a while since I released an episode. I was kind of going through my own stuff, but we're back now. And until next time, stay surrendered and stay in tune. Thank you, and have a great week. Talk soon.